And you make the good point that if you know something is headed a certain way, if you know that you're already on slippery ice, if you know that you've lost the brakes, in those moments that you're heading towards a crash, do you, I don't know, put on rose-colored glasses, look out the window, get involved with conversations with people in the back seat, or do you take control of the wheel and try to do something and try to focus the direction of the vehicle and try to preserve what life you can in the car, which is the world's populations. The global governments, the global countries are going to model themselves after economies that are functioning, not after ones that are not functioning. And so that does look a lot like China.
Neil?
The lesson of the Russian experience, I think, is slightly different, Glenn. I think what it tells you is that a very well-intentioned leader who for some people appears to be the solution to their problems can completely wreck a system. Mikhail Gorbachev was the man who broke up the Soviet Union, and the collapse of the Soviet Union 20 years ago happened at incredible speed. Nobody was really expecting his reforms to completely destroy not only the Soviet Empire in Eastern Europe, but the Soviet Union itself. And I worry a little bit about our own situation today. I think we could collapse much more quickly than people assume. I hear debates all the time about the crisis of social security or the crisis of the national debt, but it all seems to play out decades away from now, so we can kind of not worry about it now. But I think the lesson of what's going on in Europe today and what happened in Russia 20 years ago is that collapse can sneak up on you and strike very suddenly indeed, no matter how good your intentions are. I want to go back to this question of how do you actually reconnect the politicians to the aspirations of ordinary Americans, because I pin my faith on those. Ordinary Americans fundamentally don't want socialism, they don't even want Keynesianism, they don't want big deficits, and they do want small government. That is still the case, unlike in Europe, unlike in Russia, and certainly unlike in China. The question is why we don't have politicians who can deliver on that, who can actually fulfill that aspiration that ordinary Americans have. I'm hoping, Glenn, that you're going to find us the next Ronald Reagan. Is that why you're out on the West Coast? Are you scouting for actors whose careers are coming to an end?
I wish I could. I tell you,
fancy a try of politics?
I'll tell you. And the next segment, we're going to talk about the hope of America and the hope of the individual, because that's where it comes from. The problem is, you say, why aren't we finding these politicians? Because the politicians have bought into the progressive lie that it doesn't work, that America's system doesn't work. Well, it hasn't worked. You know, you said, Damon, a minute ago, well, they're not going to model themselves after a system that doesn't work. You're darn right. It doesn't work. But we've been modeling ourselves after Europe. And Europe's not working.
We're racing towards it with the health care plans, with the entitlements, with our unionization.
And it's collapsing.
Unions in Portugal, in Spain, in Greece are collapsing the economies along with government, and we can look for our own industries.
And in California, may I add.
Yeah, and it's the same story.
What did the unions do to General Motors, to the airline industry? What has the growth of government in the United States done to the United States and our bickering back and forth and entitlement spending and pet projects and the way we define GDP? What the heck are we focused on?
Okay. All right. We'll be back in just a second. Neil, I know you've got to run, but I appreciate you being part of the program. Where's the hope come from? Where's the hope come from? Where are the answers? We'll go there next. All right, if you've just joined us, might be a good thing. You don't need so much Prozac. We've been talking for the last half hour about the things that are happening over in Europe and what Greece is about to go through and how the unions are involved and how the coming insurrection. This is a book written by 12, it's called The Invisible Committee, 12 communists that, I mean, it's a frightening, frightening look at the world. By the way, Michael Moore read this book over the summer. This is fantastic. The coming insurrection. There are people here and around the world that would like to fundamentally transform things. The question is, with the amount of debt and the trouble that we have, how do we turn this around? My theory is that you can turn Europe into a nightmare, Chinese sort of hybrid kind of thing. You can't do it here in America because we have freedom bred into us. We have Our founding fathers, we've gotten so far away. That's what the Tea Party is about. We've gotten so far away from the founders' original idea, the original American experiment, that you can't even recognize what we're doing anymore. And that's what people, you'll never snuff that out. Brian?
You know, the very wise Neil Ferguson was talking about this before the break, the notion that Americans at heart don't want a government as big as we have. You know, my career as a libertarian historian and activist makes me want to believe that, and I do believe it's true, but government, unfortunately, doesn't have to obey, even in a democracy, the feelings of the masses of people who feel that way. It far more often obeys the special interests, public sector unions, big banks who need bailouts. It's the old dilemma of concentrated benefits versus diffuse costs. Government, so far, seems to be costing most of us just a little. It benefits a certain select group a whole lot. That group ends up manipulating the reins of power. What's about to happen with the sovereign debt crisis that we're seeing it in Europe now, we're going to be seeing it in America soon. Moody's is already telling us that America's AAA bond rating is at risk with how much we're spending. Then that's going to change. When the costs to the people of big government become big enough, then the very real small government spirit of America can actually act through the politicians who are always lagging indicators. They're never leading indicators.
But here's the problem. I said this right before September 11th. We were talking, I don't remember what we were talking about on the radio, but we were talking about something. I said, you cannot give a government this much power, because when you inject fear and hunger, people will flock to anybody. I mean, Jesus and Hitler were not alike, but they had one thing in common. They could look somebody in the eye who was hungry or worried or frightened and say, I have the answer, come follow me. And they did. One used it for evil, one used it for good. But they had that in common. You're going to, if this thing shimmies apart, you're going to have good and evil stand up and say, I got a plan, come follow me. It depends on how hungry we are. If we lose our, do you believe we'll lose our Moody's status, our AAA rating?
Well, Moody's is, I believe, a U.S.-based company, so we'll have to see what they do. They've drunk the Kool-Aid and assimilated it fully.
If we start to pay high interest rates for our debt, there's no way. So at some point we spiral out of control.
But you and I both know we're already there. You and I already know by the numbers.
Right.
That we're already way past that.
But when it becomes reality, when it's for the average person, when it becomes reality, how do you get people to connect with Brian's spirit instead of somebody else who say, it's these people who did it, I'll take care of them, I'll keep you safe, and I'll feed you? How do you...
You know, I think you get to that point. When is change possible? Here we have westernized economies not working, on the verge of collapse. Here we have the United States really already collapsed, but kept afloat by the printing presses. How long do you keep all that game going till the tumor inevitably kills the patient and you have social upheaval, social uprising, riots in the streets, and revolution? When does that moment come? And when is that moment in time where actual change is possible? And it is in that moment of collapse. It is in that moment post-meltdown that change actually can take place.
How do you have a career? How does this guy get on television and say this stuff and have a career? I mean, listen to what you're saying.
I'm on the Beck show.
You know what?
Damon's totally bumming me, and I'm sure all of us out. But he's right.
Neil said before about forestalling the collapse. I would argue that maybe collapse is a scary thing, but we've got massive amounts of debt in the planet that will never be able to be paid off.
Yeah, I believe you're more likely. In America, you're more likely to have that scenario than the, what does the president say now? We're past this.
Right.
We're past this. We're the worst is behind us.
When that happens, the ownership of lots of things is going to shift in ways that are going to hurt a lot of people. But it also helps to remember that every morning here on planet Earth, this is my Pollyanna talk, 5 billion people wake up with a set of skills, knowledge, resources, labor, and 5 billion same 5 billion people are waking up with the need for services and consumption, and that in a realm of freedom that these things are going to work out well. Right. We need government. We need people to realize, and crisis moments, you're right, are the best time to convince people. And I don't know if we're going to convince them the correct way, that it's not about government borrowing and borrowing and borrowing to give you whatever you think you need, but it's about government just creating an incentive structure, an environment in which we're allowed to invest and save without it being crushed. We're allowed to keep most of what we earn. And also that we can't be physically harming or stealing from others while we do it. Right, the basic thing government does. And that's a great incentive structure for living. A great incentive structure for growth, living, a rich world, the happiest life that this, what we all know is a horrible veil of tears, will allow. And I believe that through the bad times of the ownership changes that are going to occur as debts get repudiated, that the real wealth, the real stuff of life, these tables, these lights, these chairs, our knowledge and our will are still going to be here. So it's not the end of it's the end of a world, it's not the end of the world.